Here's how a sibling overpowers you. In my case, it is my own sister who has overpowered me for almost all my life. And some of the ways they might not seem as overpowering at first, but what I've realized with my own situation, growing up with my sister, and then coming back home and living with my sister again, I've realized that these things they accumulate, these things they build up. So something that might be minor or something that could be easily dismissed as not abusive or overpowering, over time it does get abusive and overpowering. And one of the ways that my sister has always overpowered me, she talks more and she's louder. She's a very talkative person and she's louder. And for the longest time, I think because when I came back home, it's been a couple of years coming back home from like 1 year of internship, from like varsity. So I was away from home for like 4 years. Yes, 4 years. And then one other year when I was in another tertiary. So essentially for like 5 years, I was away from home, coming back home on holidays. So I think the being away part kind of gave me some space maybe to not enjoy as much of the abuse or overpowering from my sister. And so when I came back, because now I was also older, even though at the time when I came back I wasn't aware, I still wasn't aware of the dysfunctional behavior around my family, of the emotional abuse, of how narcissistic my mother and my sister are. But I think because I had been away from them for so long and then I came back to live with them full time, there were just things that I couldn't tolerate anymore. And one of the things that we ended up sometimes talking about, my sister would say that it seems as if I have a problem with her being talkative, and somehow I just want her to change her entire personality. Because here's what would happen. If we were spending time, sometimes I would just go to my room. I try to not be a rude person, but I think if I had to take accountability for something that perhaps I didn't also do well, is to just switch the mood. Growing up, I was a very moody person, but coming back from being away from home, I think I got better at that. And so, what I would do is just almost shut down. I was one of those people who would just shut down and you wouldn't know what's wrong and what has changed simply because I didn't know how to communicate my feelings. And at some times, I didn't even know what feelings to communicate. So what I realized is that at those time, one of the things that my family has failed time and time again to respect about me and to embrace about me is that I am someone who needs their own personal space. And over the years, just growing up, I've tried my best to show my family that I do want to spend time with you and I will make time for you, but I also do need time for myself. But somehow for my family, it doesn't seem to be enough. So coming back home and because I was away, I was also back to being used to having the freedom of my space. Because obviously, when you're in varsity, you have the freedom of your own space. Even though I did have roommates, but because I was on my own essentially, and I could just like have my own time when I wanted to have my own time. So coming back home and not really having that freedom anymore to just be by myself because I'm introverted, I'm reserved. I recharge by being by myself. Sometimes I just need to be by myself. And so what would happen with my sister being more talkative is that she would drain my energy. She would drain my energy, and sometimes even just talking to my sister, it can feel like a battle, not in terms of it being an argument, I mean, sometimes we would argue, but in terms of it just feeling, she's overpowering when she's talking. In my previous episode, I made an example of where my sister was making a fuss about this lady who's an actress and saying that she's not an actress because we haven't seen her on TV. That's what my sister was saying. And so it's those kind of things that make talking to her a battle, because she wants you to agree with her point. She wants to have the last say. She's talkative and she's louder. She's just an overpowering person when it comes to having a conversation with her. And so because I get drained by those things, I would then shut down and come to my room. Okay? Another way that she's overpowering is she has a dominating personality. So this is also just like part of her being talkative, being louder, but also just having this dominating personality where somehow I don't know how to explain this. And this is the hard thing about these type of behaviors that are overpowering or abusive. Sometimes it's really hard to quite put your finger on it. So that's why I always say, if it doesn't feel right, it's not right. If something just doesn't feel right with the way that your sibling treats you, but you can't seem to really articulate it or say what exactly is wrong, if it doesn't feel right, then it's not right. Something is not right. But with her having a dominating personality, I could say she has a bold personality. Okay. She she is I don't know how to explain this, but it's overpowering. I mean, I think it makes sense when I explain it from the point of like her being extroverted and me being introverted. So you can obviously imagine her being more outspoken, being talkative, being more social, how that might be more dominant or might seem more bold than having a personality like mine where I am introverted, I'm reserved, I'm quiet. And obviously, that's not her fault. So it's not her fault that I am as reserved or as quiet or not as talkative. Let me not say quiet, but not as talkative as her. That's not her fault. That's not what I'm blaming her for. But her dominating personality, it's in the sense that it's not considerate of other people's personality. So because she's talkative, because she's social, yada yada, she's just inconsiderate of other people's personalities. For example, mine. For the longest time, I've just never had the freedom to be embraced for who I am, for being reserved. Instead, it always felt like my mother and my sister were always trying to push me out of this box of being reserved, of wanting to be by myself. At other times, it did seem like they were worried. I honestly don't think they were genuinely worried. But at other times, it would be that they are worried that maybe I'm thinking too much, or that maybe you're depressed or you're sad. And so that's why maybe they wouldn't want me to spend so much time by myself. Another way that my sister is overpowering is that she wants to be involved in what I'm interested in. Now, this is the latest thing that I've noticed about my sister, and before I didn't really notice it because I was busy envying her. I was jealous of her. I wanted to be bubbly like her. I wanted to be talkative like her. I wanted to be liked like she was. I wanted to be social like she was. So I never saw myself interesting. I never saw how, in my own way, I'm interesting and I have my own interests. And when I started just kind of, and I think it started more when I came back home because I had been away and learned to be independent and learned to find what interests me. And so when I came back home, and obviously they would see now that I have different interests. For example, I have creative interests. And my sister quickly took on to that and joined me on doing creative stuff. And at first, I didn't have a problem with that. I was like, cool, we get to do something together. And at the time, I wasn't emotionally distancing myself because I was not fully aware of the emotional abuse and how narcissistic she is. And so I was like, yeah, let's do this together as sisters. But I didn't realize that it was because she is hopping on what I'm interested in and what seems cool to her and what will make her seem cool. It wasn't really about her maybe supporting me in my own creative stuff. It was more about her also seeming to have interest in what I had interest in, and not because she's trying to bond with me, but just because that's also gonna make her look some type of way, if you get what I mean. And so we did that creative stuff for a while and then we stopped. And then there was a chance for us at church to do something together. And it was more, I was actually the one who had more of the capability to do that. But also, she came on board. I was like, okay, it's fine. She can also come on board. And then last week, was it last week? The other one that kind of just proved it to me that she just wants to, she doesn't want to be left out. I think that's the problem with her. She doesn't want to be left out on anything that might be happening and might have the possibility to be fun or interesting, and I get to do it by myself, you know? And this is something that she has obviously never said and would never admit, and she would deny it so much even if I said this to her. But I'm learning to trust what I observe and trust my instincts. And this I trust. So I read books. So I go to the library, I borrow books, and now all of a sudden she wants to read books. Listen, why this is a problem for me. I have had a hard time establishing my own personality, understanding my own personality, embracing my own personality, because all I did was envy my sister and want to be like her because she was liked, because she was funny, because she was social. And so now that I'm finding my feet on just embracing who I am and being like, you know what, this is who I am. I don't have a lot of energy to do certain things. I don't even have a lot of energy to be talkative. This is who I am. I'm starting to embrace who I am and I'm finding my own interest. That is like my creative stuff, me reading. And somehow in all that I'm interested in, she wants to jump in. And this one is excuse me, is is what's the word? Difficult? Not really, but like upsetting. Yes, it's very upsetting because I feel like I've found my own things that I love that make me me. And it's like she's interfering in my personal space. Granted, with the creative stuff, I did approach her. I did suggest that she joins because at the time I wasn't really mindful of the emotional abuse. So I wouldn't say she just jumped in by herself, but she was also really eager um, because, you know, she would also get to look some type of way. She would also get to look cool and all of that. But with now going forward and seeing her being interested in other things that I'm interested in, to me, it just feels like an invasion of my space, a space that I've tried to cultivate so that I can start to enjoy being who I am, start to embrace who I am, and start to find myself interesting. And so when she said that she also like wants to go with me to the library, like even just going to the library for me, that's like my personal space. I think these are some of the things that even happen in like marriages where everything is mingled together and nobody has their own space. And I believe in the word of God, when two people get married, they become one. So a lot of what they do is gonna be intertwined. But at the same time, in order to maintain some sanity, in order to even cultivate the relationship, there is still a need for individual activities or individual recreational stuff. And so when like my husband, I'm like, I wanna go to yoga. He's like, I'm gonna go with you. And he's like, I wanna go watch soccer with the guys. And I'm like, I'm gonna go with you. Can you see how that's now interfering with someone's personal space and personal time and their own time to just kind of do something without you, not because they don't love you, because they need that, because that's actually good for the relationship, for them to kind of just have space from you at times, and not because you're fighting and not because they don't like you, not because something has happened, just because that's also going to help the relationship to have some individual activities. So that's the same thing with like my sister wanting to be involved in things that I'm involved in. And this is actually part of codependency, which I will cover in another episode, because this is a thing that kind of happens in this family. Like my mother and my sister, they just have this mentality of like, you should involve us, you know? And and together as a family, even myself included, it was this mentality that you should always like involve your family. But that's not necessary for everything. There are certain things that can just be your thing and you don't have to involve your family. And so even her asking to go with me to the library, now seeming, my sister is not a big reader, now seeming to be interested in reading, it annoyed me because you stepping into my space. You stepping into my personal space. And because I've envied my sister so much, I always saw her having her own things, my sister grew up being the type of person who has a lot of friends, always had something to do. Her friends would take her out. And I never interfered with that space. I never interfered with her personal space, with her friends. Like, even with the friendship thing, oh, this is so annoying. I was able to make a friend at church, and this was a church that was relatively new to us. So I was able to make a friend. And all of a sudden, somehow, that friend that was mine is now hers. It's like it's this need to almost take everything that I'm doing or be involved in everything that I'm doing, not because she wants to bond with me, not because of that, but simply because I think she thinks she might be missing out on something. So if I have a new friend, it seems like maybe she might be missing out on having like a cool friend too. Or if I'm doing something that I'm interested in, she's thinking she might be missing out on doing something interesting. Instead of developing and cultivating her own interests, she somehow steps into mine. And that's one of the ways she's overpowering. But I think now I'm learning to kind of like stand my ground, even though it's still hard because I'm not used to it. I was always the person, like I said, to just shut down and be moody instead of just communicating. And it's not always beneficial to communicate with a narcissistic person, but it is helpful to just be straightforward and create boundaries, enforce boundaries more than talk about boundaries. Because with these people, I was listening to another episode the other day where this lady was saying that you have to enforce boundaries more than just state your boundaries. So if you tell someone, hey, when I'm doing this, I don't want you to interrupt me, you have to kind of enforce that, whether that means like you close the door or maybe you switch off your phone so that they don't reach you. Because when you state it and then they call, and then maybe you think, okay, maybe it's something important because I told them not to interrupt me, they can break that boundary. And then you answer the phone or maybe you open the door. Because with narcissistic people, it's all about them. So even if you state your boundaries, you tell them that this is how I want to be treated, or this is what I want, or this is what I prefer, it's always better to enforce it, because even if you state it for them, they're gonna seem like they hear you, but they're not really gonna hear you. You're just basically speaking to a wall. Another way that my sister's overpowering is that she needs a lot of attention. This woman needs a lot of attention. And this also goes back to her being talkative. Like, I've tried my best to embrace my sister's personality. I've tried to be the listener that I am, because I'm more of a listener than a talker. And she can just talk nonstop. She can just talk nonstop. Other ways that she wants attention. Sometimes she gets sick, and then I've said this before in another episode, and then she will just drag it on, because now she just wants the attention of, like, look at me, I'm not feeling well, look at me, I was just sick. She requires a lot of attention. Okay, and that is draining for someone like me. That is not even for someone like me, for anyone. For anyone it can be draining. For anyone it can be just a lot to constantly feel like you need to give them attention, you need to give them validation, you need to make them feel special. It's a lot. Okay, another way that she's overpowering is that she indirectly competes with me. Like I was saying, her being interested in what I'm interested in, this is one of the way that she competes with me, even just around the house with doing chores. Like, my sister is actually lazy. I think over the years she has tried to get better, but my sister is actually lazy. But sometimes it's ridiculous things where you feel like and I think she gets this from my mother, because I didn't see this for the longest time. The fact that my mother could never really compliment me, or even us sometimes, but I think she could compliment my sister often, even though, because this is the thing with narcissistic mothers. They will even hold back compliments or praise or just acknowledging you, because somehow they think that's going to inflate you, that's going to make you think you better. And that's one of the things that my mother has done to us, is kind of just hold back um that motherly, because you want your mother to compliment you. You want your mother to praise you when you've done something good, you know? It's like when you're a little kid and you always show your mother something, Mommy, look what I did, because you want that validation from your mother. You are not a grown up where you no longer have to need validation from other people, even though from time to time, all of us, we need a healthy dose of validation. But when you grow up, you are meant to no longer need constant validation. But as a child, that's all you know. You want your mother to validate you. You want her to tell you what you did was good. You want her to be impressed with your grades. You want her to be impressed with, like, your dress. And my mother, that's one of the things that she managed to hold back. And for the longest time, my sister and I, we didn't really notice this, but she would hold it back, or sometimes she would point out something maybe even wrong with your outfit. So instead of complimenting you, she'll say, is that the hairstyle that you are choosing to go with? And all of a sudden now you feel like you don't look pretty because mommy has said, like, something's wrong with your hair. What was I talking about? I was talking about my sister competing with me. So that's one of the ways that even my own mother has competed with us, because when she would see us looking pretty, she couldn't acknowledge that. She acted like we are his siblings, and it's kind of hard for her to admit that we are pretty. And that's one way that somebody competes with you, like looks wise, like even just sometimes. I remember, because I worked hard on my school grades, even though in high school my school grades, they just kind of went down because I had changed schools. But I would work hard on my school grades thinking that my mother would be impressed, and she would just seem like she's glad that I passed, but not really acknowledge that my grades are good, you know? So that's one of the ways that you see that somebody's competing with you, where they don't really want to acknowledge where you are good and where you are great. And as a family, as a freaking family, those are the things that you should be able to give one another, to tell each other that, hey, you really did great, you really passed well, or really look good, or you really did this great. But not this family. No, not a family of narcissists. Another way that my sister is overpowering is that she hardly helps, but requires a lot of help from me. I don't know if this is part of her being lazy or being entitled or a combination of both, but my sister is not the kind of person to quickly offer help. And if she does, it's because she it's more about her than her helping you. Like, for example, my sister doesn't really like meat. And so she'll often, like, when we eat, and then she gives us, like, oh, you can have my meat. And then one day, I don't know what she asked from our food. And then she said, but I always give you my meat. She's that kind of person that when she does something that seems good at the time, you're gonna pay back later. Okay, you're gonna pay it back later, and she's gonna bring it up. But I did that for you. She's that type of person. And so, with her hardly helping, it is amazing how much help she requires from other people, like how much help she requires from me. But she hardly helps. She hardly even does her chores well. And this is annoying because I'm unemployed, she's studying, and we are home together. And the chores obviously fall on us and not on our working mother. And like, she hardly does her part, but she requires a lot from other people. Another way that she's overpowering is she's very cheeky, she's very snappy, and she has quick comebacks. I remember one day confronting her about this, and I said, "You know what, my sister, I'm glad that you are able to talk like you can, because I can't quickly think of comebacks. I can't find something snappy to say." And she can quickly, like, she's fast, she thinks on her toes when it comes to like a comeback, when it comes to being snappy, like, it comes easily to her. And that has been the most overpowering thing about my sister, because again, I'm reserved, so she's more up there. She has a more bolder personality, and she's very snappy. She has quick comebacks. She has an answer for everything. Like, even if you confront her of something or you tell her you didn't like something, she has an answer for everything. Instead of just simply acknowledging what she has done wrong or apologizing, no, she will have a comeback. And that's one of the ways she has been overpowering. She often also puts like a threatening look. Like, my sister has this look that just says, "Don't even bother. Like, don't try to tell me anything." It's more of like a defensive look, because I've been a very defensive person also. I know that when you don't want to be confronted, or you don't want to deal with a certain issue, or you don't want people to address certain things, you just give them a look so that they don't even come near you. Another way is that she's always been a pushover. But now that I'm starting to push back, she's acting like I'm the snappy one. All of a sudden, it's like I'm the problem, because now I'm pushing back. She's a pushover. Even with my mother, I see it with my mother. She's a pushover. Even with some of her friends, she's just, no. She's not. Huh? No. What am I saying? What am I saying? What do I want to say? A pushover is the other person. She's a bully. Let me put it like that. She's a bully, and now that I'm starting to push back, because I was the pushover. Yes, that's how that was supposed to go. I was the pushover, and other people in her life are the pushovers. And when you start to push back, she makes you seem like you are the bad person. For someone who's very snappy and very cheeky and has quick comebacks, she can't stand it when other people do that to her. She can't stand it when you have a quick comeback. She can't stand it when you are snappy with her. It's just the story, the classic story of a bully. Like, when you start standing up to them, you see how easily they crack. That's my sister. She also hated when I confronted, she hated when I confront her about something, but she loves giving other people her comments, correcting me as if I'm a 6-year old. And she also does this to my mother. And I blame my mother for my sister being like this because she let her get away with doing it to me, but also my mother let her get away with doing it to her. And so now my sister is this big monster that could have been tamed at a very young age. This could have been handled when my sister was young.